I drove 8 hours to attend my son's wedding and meet his fiancée for the first time. When I arrived and introduced myself, she slapped me and said, "Staff is supposed to be invisible. Don't talk, just serve the champagne." I was in shock, but when she found out I was her mother-in-law, she said, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment what city you are watching me from, so I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Lauren, and I am 61 years old. I never thought that at this age I would have to relearn what it means to be a mother, what it means to be respected, much less what it means to be humiliated by someone I didn't even know. It all began on a Friday morning when I received a call from Glenn, my only son. His voice sounded different, more mature, but also nervous. "Mum, I have something important to tell you." I sat down in my favorite chair by the window, the one where I always drink my morning coffee while watching the garden I've tended for so many years. "Tell me, honey, is everything all right?" "I'm getting married." The words dropped like stones in still water. Glenn was 32, and since his divorce 5 years ago, he had been focused on his career. He never mentioned seriously dating anyone. "Getting married? When? To whom?" "Her name is Amy. She's incredible, Mum." "I've never met anyone like her. The wedding is this weekend." My stomach clenched. "This weekend? Glenn, that's so soon. Why didn't you tell me about her before?" There was a long pause. Everything happened so fast. Amy is special. She says that when you know it's the right person, there's no reason to wait. Something in his tone unsettled me, but I tried to stay calm. "Well, I would love to meet her. Where is the ceremony going to be?" "At the Grandview Hotel, on the coast." "Mum, I know it's a long trip for you, but—" "Glenn," my voice was firm. "I'm your mother. I'll be there." The Grandview Hotel was 8 hours from my house. I drove all night Friday, stopping only for gas and coffee. My mind was racing with 1,000 questions. How was it possible that Glenn was ready to marry someone I didn't even know existed? Why all the rush? I arrived at the hotel on Saturday morning, exhausted but determined. The place was stunning, a restored Victorian building overlooking the ocean. The gardens were perfectly manicured, and I could see that the wedding would be costly. Very costly. In the lobby, an elegant young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair was talking to the event coordinator. She was wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my rent for 2 months. Her gestures were precise, controlled, and her voice had that quality some people use when they are accustomed to others obeying them. "No, no, and no. The floral arrangements are wrong. I asked for white peonies, not ivory, and these candles are too low. How are they going to look in the photographs?" The coordinator, a middle-aged man with years of experience visible in his tired face, was patiently nodding as he took notes. I approached with a smile, assuming this had to be Amy. I wanted to make a good first impression. "Excuse me," I said softly. "Are you Amy? I'm Lauren, Glenn's mum." The woman turned to me, and for a moment her expression froze. She looked me up and down, taking note of my simple travel dress, my comfortable driving shoes, my hair that needed a touch-up after the long night on the road. "Pardon?" Her voice turned cold, cutting. "Who let you in here?" I blinked, confused. "I'm the groom's mother, Lauren Henderson. Glenn invited me to the wedding." Amy looked at me as if I were something unpleasant she had found on the sole of her shoe. Then, without warning, her hand shot up and she gave me a slap that echoed in the hotel lobby. The sound was dry, loud. I felt an immediate burning on my cheek and the metallic taste of blood where my teeth bit into the inside of my lip. "Staff is supposed to be invisible," she shouted, loud enough for several people to turn and stare at us. Don't speak unless you're spoken to. Your job is to serve champagne and stay out of the way. Do you understand? I was paralyzed. The physical pain was nothing compared to the humiliation I felt burning in my chest. Around us, the early guests were whispering among themselves. The event coordinator looked like he wanted to disappear. Amy continued, her voice full of disdain. And please, do something about your appearance. This is an elegant wedding, not a small-town church gathering. The champagne is on the back table. Make sure the glasses are always full, and don't spill anything on the guests' dresses. Then she walked away, her heels clicking on the marble, leaving me there with my hand on my stinging cheek and my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Part of me wanted to scream the truth right there. I wanted to tell her exactly who I was and see the expression on her face when she realized her mistake. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the shock, or maybe it was an instinct telling me I needed to understand the situation better before acting. I headed to the nearest restroom and looked in the mirror. My cheek was red, slightly swelling. My eyes looked glassy from the tears I refused to shed. I took several deep breaths, trying to process what had just happened. I returned to the main area of the hotel and observed. Amy was now talking with a group of young women, all dressed in designer clothes, all laughing at something she had said. Every now and then, one of them looked in my direction and whispered something to another. I decided to stay near the champagne table, not because Amy had ordered me to, but because from there I could observe everything without drawing attention. I needed to understand who this woman was that was going to marry my son. Over the next hour, I watched Amy interact with the hotel staff. She was rude, contemptuous, with every single one of them. I saw how she made a young server cry because she didn't place the silverware exactly as Amy wanted. I saw how she yelled at the florist for bringing the flowers 5 minutes late. But what troubled me most was seeing Glenn. When he finally appeared, dressed in an immaculate tuxedo, he approached Amy with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. She whispered something in his ear, and he nodded quickly, like a child trying to avoid getting into trouble. "Is everything all right, sweetheart?" Glenn asked, and I could detect anxiety in his voice. "Is it okay now?" "Of course, baby," Amy replied, stroking his cheek. "Just some minor issues with the staff. Nothing I can't handle." Glenn kissed her gently and then looked around the room. His eyes paused on me for a moment, but Amy quickly drew his attention elsewhere. In that moment, I knew something was terribly wrong. My son, the man I had raised to be gentle and respectful, was about to marry someone who had slapped a stranger without a second thought. But what scared me most was that Glenn seemed to be walking on eggshells around her. And if Amy was capable of treating someone she thought was hotel staff that way, how would she treat Glenn's family once she felt secure in her position as his wife? I decided to remain silent and observe. For the next 2 hours before the ceremony, I became an invisible spectator of who Amy Wellington really was, as I heard someone call her. From my position near the champagne table, I could hear snippets of conversation that chilled me to the bone. Amy was talking to her bridesmaids, a group of women who seemed cut from the same mold, blonde, stylish, and with that air of superiority that only comes with generational wealth. "Honestly, I don't understand why Glenn is so attached to his past," Amy was saying, adjusting her diamond earrings. "It's like he can't let go of that middle-class life. But he'll get over it." One of her friends, a redhead in an emerald green dress, laughed. "Well, at least he's moldable, unlike my ex who never wanted to change." "Exactly," Amy replied. "Glenn is a project. He has potential. He just needs the right guidance. For example, he insisted on inviting all those people from his previous job." Can you imagine? Mechanics and technicians at my wedding. I had to be very clear about the kind of event this was going to be. My stomach churned. Glenn had worked as an auto technician before getting his current job at a logistics company. It was an honest job, and he was proud of what he did with his hands. Hearing Amy talk about it as something embarrassing made me clench my fists. "And what about his family?" another bridesmaid asked. Amy grimaced. "Well, there's the problem. His mother is, let's just say she doesn't exactly fit our vision. Glenn wanted to invite her, of course, but I managed to convince him it would be better to keep things intimate. I told him we could have a small family dinner afterward, in a place that was more appropriate." I felt as if I had been slapped again, this time straight in the heart. Amy had manipulated Glenn into not officially inviting me to his wedding. The fact that I was there was only because Glenn had a moment of courage and called me at the last minute. "Smart," the redhead murmured. "And he agreed?" "He resisted a little at first," Amy shrugged. "But I explained to him that if he really loved me, he would understand that some things had to change. I told him he couldn't be divided between his past and our future." It worked. One of the younger women in the group looked uncomfortable. "Don't you think that's a little cruel?" "I mean, it's his mother." Amy looked at her coldly. "Honey, marriage is about priorities. Glenn needs to learn that I am his priority now. His mother has had 32 years to be important in his life. It's my turn." I had to walk away before I did something I would regret. I headed toward the hotel gardens, needing fresh air and a moment to process what I had heard. In the garden, I found an older man sitting on a bench, smoking a cigar. He had neatly combed silver hair and wore a suit that was clearly custom-made. When he saw me approach, he immediately put out the cigar. "Excuse me," he said in a gentle voice. "I didn't mean to bother you with the smoke." "Don't worry," I replied, sitting down at the other end of the bench. "I needed some fresh air." He studied me for a moment. "You're not from around here, are you? I mean, you're not from Amy's social circle." I turned to him, surprised by his direct observation. "How do you know?" "Because all of Amy's friends have that look." He paused, searching for the right words. "Like the world owes them something." "You don't have that look." He introduced himself as Robert Wellington, Amy's father. For the next 20 minutes, we had a conversation that revealed more about my future daughter-in-law than I had learned all morning. "Amy is my only daughter," Robert told me, looking out at the ocean. "Her mother and I raised her with every advantage possible, perhaps too many advantages." "What do you mean?" Robert sighed deeply. "Amy has never had to work for anything. She's never faced a real hardship. When something doesn't go her way, she just crushes whatever is in her path. Like with her previous relationships. There have been 3 engagements before this one," Robert admitted, and my blood ran cold. Each time she started by trying to change the man. When they resisted, or when she could no longer mold them the way she wanted, she found reasons to end things. Generally reasons that made them look like the guilty ones. "And Glenn?" "Glenn is different." Robert looked at me directly. "He's more malleable. Amy sees that as an advantage, but I worry about him." "Do you know him?" For a moment, I considered telling him the truth, but something made me hesitate. "A little," I replied vaguely. "He's a good man," Robert continued. "Hard-working, honest, but Amy is already changing him. I've seen how he acts differently when she's around, as if he's constantly worried about doing something wrong." I remembered the anxious expression on Glenn's face when he talked to Amy in the lobby. Robert was right. "She mentioned something about making changes in his life," I commented carefully. Robert nodded gravely. Amy has been pressuring him to change jobs, to move away from his current friends, even to limit contact with his family. She calls it building their future together, but I see something more sinister. Have you told Amy this? I've tried. Robert rubbed his temples. But Amy is very skilled at making any criticism seem like it's the fault of the person criticizing her. She has a way of twisting things to always become the victim. Just then, we heard footsteps approaching. Amy appeared on the garden path, looking annoyed. Dad, I've been looking for you everywhere. I need you to talk to the photographer about the angles for the family photos. Her eyes briefly settled on me with that same expression of disdain I had seen before. And you? She said to me in a cold voice. The coordinator is looking for you. Apparently, some guests have commented that the champagne service has been slow. Robert looked at me with a strange expression, as if he was starting to connect the pieces of a puzzle. But before he could say anything, Amy had already led her father toward the hotel. I was left alone in the garden, my mind racing with everything I had learned. Amy was not only cruel to employees and manipulative with Glenn, but she had a pattern of behavior. 3 broken engagements. 3 men who had probably gone through the same process Glenn was living now. When I returned to the hotel, I saw Glenn talking nervously on the phone in a corner. His voice was tense, defensive. No, Mom, it's not that. Yes, I know you said you were coming, but Amy thinks it would be better. No, it's not that I don't want you here. It's just that... My heart broke to hear how Amy had put him in the position of having to reject his own mother. And what was worse, Glenn was clearly struggling with the decision, but still choosing to please Amy. He ended the call and ran his hands through his hair, looking defeated. Just then, Amy appeared and put her arm around his shoulders. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" she asked in a sweet voice, completely different from the tone she had used with me and the employees. "Yes," Glenn nodded, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "Just, you know, family stuff." "I know, baby, but you're doing the right thing. Our new life together has to be our priority. We can't let the past drag us back." As I watched them, I realized I was witnessing more than just a wedding. I was watching the end of Glenn's relationship with everything he had been before Amy. And the scariest part was that Glenn seemed to be voluntarily collaborating in his own transformation. The ceremony was about to begin, and I was still officially invisible. But I knew that was about to change, and when it did, nothing would ever be the same. The ceremony was about to begin. Guests were heading toward the main ballroom, an elegant space with windows overlooking the ocean. The chairs were covered with white silk slips and gold bows, and the central aisle was carpeted with white rose petals. I remained in the back, still invisible to most of those present. From my position, I could see everything. Amy's family occupying the first seats on the left side. The few friends of Glenn that Amy had allowed to invite were scattered on the right side, and a noticeable empty space where the groom's family should have been sitting. The officiant, an elderly man with a warm smile, stood at the altar. Glenn appeared through a side door, looking handsome but nervous. His eyes scanned the audience, pausing for a moment in the area where I was standing. For a second, our eyes met, and I saw a flash of confusion on his face, as if he recognized something familiar, but couldn't identify what it was. The music started, and the bridesmaids made their entrance. Every one of them was perfect, as if they had stepped out of a magazine. Their pale pink dresses probably cost more than $1,000 each, and their hairstyles were works of art. Finally, the doors opened for Amy. She was wearing a dress that was, I admit, absolutely stunning. White satin with French lace, a train that extended several feet behind her, and a veil that seemed to float as she walked. I mentally calculated that the dress had cost at least $15,000, possibly more. Robert walked beside her, looking proud, but with something in his eyes that reminded me of our conversation in the garden. When they reached the altar, he kissed Amy's cheek and whispered something in her ear. She smiled, but it was a cold, calculated smile. The officiant began the ceremony with the traditional words about marriage, love, and commitment. But as he spoke, I couldn't stop thinking about everything I had witnessed that morning. How was it possible that Glenn didn't see what I had seen? Or did he see it and decide to ignore it? Today we are here to unite Glenn Michael Henderson and Amy Elizabeth Wellington in marriage, the officiant said, and my heart tightened as I heard my son's full name, Glenn Michael. I had named him Michael after my father, who had died when Glenn was a baby. My father had been a gentle, hard-working man who treated everyone with respect, no matter their social position. I wondered what he would think of this situation. The ceremony continued with the traditional vows. When it was Amy's turn, her words were perfect, rehearsed, but empty of real emotion. She spoke about eternal love and unwavering commitment, but her voice had the same quality she had used when scolding the employees, controlled, calculated. Glenn, on the other hand, looked genuinely moved. His vows were improvised, from the heart, talking about how Amy had changed his life and how he hoped to build a future together. The irony was painful to witness. If there is anyone who has a reason why this couple should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace, the officiant said. For a moment, I considered speaking. I considered standing up and telling everyone present exactly who I was and what I had witnessed that morning. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the hope that Glenn would realize what he was doing for himself, or maybe it was simply the shock of the whole situation. The silence stretched for a few seconds that seemed eternal, and then the officiant continued. By the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Glenn kissed Amy with a radiant smile, and the audience applauded. But I stood motionless, feeling as if I had lost my son forever. During the reception, I stayed in my role as the invisible staff member. I watched as Amy received congratulations and gifts, as she posed for endless photos, as she commanded the attention of everyone in the room. It was during the family introductions that everything changed. The master of ceremonies, an enthusiastic young man with a microphone in hand, began to introduce the important families. First, he spoke about the Wellingtons, mentioning the family's wine import business and their prominent position in local society. Then it was time to introduce the Henderson family. And now, the master of ceremonies said, I'd like to introduce the Groom's family. Unfortunately, most of Glenn's relatives couldn't be here today, but we have the honor of having his beloved mother, Lauren Henderson, with us. The microphone amplified the words throughout the room. I felt as if time had stopped. All heads turned, searching for the groom's mother among the seated guests. Amy, who was in the center of the dance floor posing for photos, froze. Her perfect smile slowly faded as she processed the words she had just heard. Lauren Henderson, the master of ceremonies repeated. Are you here with us? Glenn quickly approached the master of ceremonies and whispered something in his ear. I saw his face fill with confusion and then panic as he began to understand what was happening. Ah, the master of ceremonies said. It seems there's some confusion. Pardon the interruption, but it was too late. Amy had connected the dots. Her eyes scanned the room frantically until they landed on me. The expression on her face went from shock to horror, and then to something I can only describe as pure fury. She headed toward me with quick, deliberate steps, her wedding dress dragging dramatically behind her. Guests moved aside as she passed, sensing the tension that filled the air. You, she said when she reached me, her voice trembling with rage. "Who the hell are you, really?" I straightened up, feeling that the moment of truth had arrived. "I am Lauren Henderson," I said in a clear, firm voice. "Glenn's mother." The silence that followed was deafening. Amy stared at me as if she had just seen me materialize out of thin air. Her face cycled through a series of emotions: shock, disbelief, embarrassment, and finally a rage so intense that for a moment I thought she was going to hit me again. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, no, no. This cannot be happening." Glenn rushed over, his face pale as a sheet. "Mum," he said, and I could hear years of love and confusion in that single word. "What are you doing here? I thought we agreed that—" "Agreed?" My voice came out louder than I had planned. "Glenn, you called me Friday and told me you were getting married. We didn't agree on anything about me not coming." Amy turned to Glenn, her eyes flashing. "You told me she wasn't going to come. You told me she understood it would be better to stay away." I... Glenn looked like a child caught between two fighting parents. "I didn't know Mum was going to come anyway." "Anyway," I repeated, feeling a new wave of pain. "Glenn, I'm your mother." "Why wouldn't I come to your wedding?" Amy interrupted before Glenn could answer. "Because you don't fit here," she said in a poisonous voice. "Look at this place. Look at these people. This is not your social class. Glenn is trying to build a new life, a better life, and you're just a reminder of everything he's trying to leave behind." The words hit me like physical slaps. Around us, guests were murmuring and pointing. Some had their phones out, recording the drama unfolding in front of them. "Amy," Robert Wellington said, suddenly appearing by our side. His voice was tense, warning. "Perhaps we should take this conversation somewhere more private." "No," Amy said, her voice rising in volume. "I'm not going to be humiliated at my own wedding. This woman snuck in here pretending to be staff." "Who does that? What kind of sick person sneaks into her own son's wedding?" "The kind of person," I said, finding my voice and my strength, "whose son called her and personally invited her, but whose daughter-in-law apparently had other plans." Glenn finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Mum, please, don't make this any harder than it already is." And there it was. My own son, asking me to leave his wedding so his new wife wouldn't feel uncomfortable. The son I had raised, whom I had loved unconditionally, whom I had supported through everything, was now asking me to disappear, to please a woman who had hit and humiliated me. In that moment, I knew I had lost much more than a wedding invitation. I had lost my son, and he had been completely complicit in that loss. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The guests had formed a circle around us, some recording with their phones, others whispering among themselves. It was like being in the middle of a car crash that everyone wanted to see, but no one wanted to stop. Amy was breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling under the corset of her wedding dress. Her cheeks were red with anger, and her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. "Glenn," she said in a dangerously calm voice, "I need to talk to you, now, privately." Glenn looked between Amy and me, clearly divided. "Amy, perhaps we should—" "Now, Glenn." Her voice had a quality that admitted no discussion. I watched them walk away toward a corner of the room, where Amy began to speak in a low but animated voice. Even from a distance, I could see she was furious. Glenn nodded constantly, his shoulders sinking lower with every word she said. Robert Wellington approached me, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Mrs. Henderson, I deeply regret what just happened. Amy is, well, she's under a lot of stress." "Mr. Wellington," I said, keeping my voice calm. Your daughter hit me thinking I was hotel staff. Was that due to stress too? He closed his eyes for a moment, as if the truth pained him to admit. Amy has control issues. She always has. When things don't go exactly as she plans, she tends to react badly. And Glenn knows this? Robert looked at me directly. I think Glenn sees what Amy wants him to see. She's very skilled at showing different faces to different people. Just then, an older woman approached us. She had elegantly styled grey hair and wore a pearl necklace that probably cost more than my car. Robert said in a tense voice, "We need to do something about this situation. Guests are starting to ask uncomfortable questions." "Margaret," Robert replied, "I'd like to introduce you to Lauren Henderson, Glenn's mother." Margaret looked me up and down with an expression that mixed curiosity and disdain. "Ah, so you're the famous missing mother." "Missing?" I repeated, confused. "Amy told us you abandoned Glenn when he was young, that you had been out of his life for years. She said you were a negligent mother and that Glenn had to fend for himself since he was a teenager." I felt as if I had been punched in the gut. That is completely false. I've been in Glenn's life constantly. We talk on the phone every week until a few months ago when I stopped, remembering how Glenn's calls had become less frequent in the last 6 months. How when we did talk, he sounded distracted, as if he was worried about something else. "Until a few months ago?" Robert asked. "The calls became less frequent after he started dating Amy. I thought it was normal, that he was busy with the new relationship." Margaret and Robert exchanged a meaningful look. "How much do you know about Amy and Glenn's relationship?" "Glenn called me Friday to tell me he was getting married. That was the first time I heard Amy's name." "Friday," Robert murmured. "That means Amy couldn't stop him from calling you." "Stop," Margaret sighed. "Amy has been telling us for months that Glenn had decided to cut contact with his family because he wanted to make a fresh start. She said you had been controlling and manipulative, that you didn't approve of their relationship." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of raised voices. Glenn and Amy had returned, and it was obvious they had had a heated argument. Amy's eyes were red, but not from sadness, but from anger. "All right," Amy said loudly, addressing me. "Glenn and I have talked, and we've decided it's best for you to leave. This is our wedding, our special day, and we are not going to let you ruin it with your drama." "My drama?" I couldn't help my voice rising. "I'm the one causing drama." "Yes," Amy said, crossing her arms. "You snuck into our wedding uninvited. You pretended to be hotel staff, and now you're trying to make everything about you." "Amy," Robert interrupted, "I think there are some things you need to clarify." "There's nothing to clarify, Dad. This woman is clearly disturbed. What normal mother sneaks into her son's wedding?" "A normal mother who was invited by her son," I said firmly. Amy laughed, but it was a cold, humorless laugh. "Please, Glenn told me you hadn't spoken in months." "That's not true." "It's not true?" Amy pulled out her phone. "Glenn, show your mother the call log." Glenn looked like a trapped animal. His eyes darted between Amy and me, clearly desperate to find a way out of the situation. "Glenn," I said softly, "tell her the truth." He opened his mouth, then closed it. Finally, in a voice barely audible, he said, "Mum, I think it would be better if you left." The words hit me like a hammer. My own son, in public, in front of all these strangers, was asking me to leave his wedding. "All right," I said, keeping my voice steady even though I felt like I was falling apart inside. "I'll leave." But before I do, I want you to know something, Glenn. I turned to him, completely ignoring Amy. I love you. I have loved you every day of your life, and I always will. But I am not going to stay here and be humiliated by a woman who hit me without provocation and who clearly has serious issues. Amy opened her mouth to protest, but I stopped her with a look. And Amy, I continued, I hope you know what you're getting into. I've been watching you all morning. I've seen how you treat people you consider beneath you. I've heard how you talk about Glenn when he's not around. And I've seen how you manipulate him to do what you want. I'm not finished. My voice had a strength I didn't know I possessed. Glenn is a good man, a gentle, hard-working, honest man. If what you want is to change him, to turn him into something he is not, then you don't love him. What you love is the idea of what you can make of him. The silence that followed was complete. Even the murmuring of the guests had stopped. I headed toward the exit, but before I reached the door, I heard Margaret Wellington's voice. Amy, dear, I think there are some things your father and I need to discuss with you. I stopped without turning around. Like the fact that you told us Glenn's mother abandoned him when he was a child, Margaret continued. Or the fact that you told us Glenn had decided to cut contact with his family of his own free will. That's what happened, Amy insisted, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Is it really? Robert said. Because I just had a very interesting conversation with Mrs. Henderson, and her version of events is quite different from yours. Don't believe her, Amy said, and now there was real panic in her voice. She's lying. She's trying to sabotage my marriage. Amy, Glenn said, and his voice sounded strange, as if he was beginning to wake up from a dream. Did you tell your parents my mum abandoned me? There was a long pause. Too long. Glenn, honey, I can explain. Yes or no, Amy? Did you tell your parents my mother abandoned me? Another pause. Then, in a very quiet voice, I thought it would be easier if... If what? Glenn's voice was hardening. If you lied about my mother. I decided I had heard enough. I headed toward the door, but not before I heard Amy start to cry and insist that everything she had done was for love. As I walked toward my car, I could hear raised voices behind me. Glenn was finally starting to ask the right questions, and Amy was starting to run out of convincing answers. But it was too late for me. The damage was done. My son had chosen a woman who had lied about me, who had publicly humiliated me, and who had manipulated him into kicking me out of his own wedding. As I drove home that night, I couldn't help but wonder if I would ever get my son back, or if Amy had won this battle permanently. 2 weeks had passed since the wedding when I received the call I had been waiting for and dreading at the same time. It was Glenn, but his voice sounded different, tense, tired, as if he had aged years in 14 days. Mum, we need to talk. I slowly sat down in my favorite chair, the same one where I had received the news of his engagement, which seemed like an eternity ago. I'm listening, honey. Not over the phone. Can I come see you? I need to understand some things. An hour later, I heard his car pull into the driveway. When I opened the door, I was shocked by what I saw. Glenn looked gaunt. He had lost weight, and he had deep circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept in days. His clothes, which had always been impeccable since he started dating Amy, were wrinkled. Hi, Mom, he said, and his voice broke a little on that last word. I hugged him, and for a moment he was my little boy again, not the man who had asked me to leave his wedding. We sat in the living room. Glenn looked at his hands, clearly struggling with how to start the conversation. Amy is furious with me, he finally said. She says I'm ungrateful for questioning her version of things. And what do you think? He looked up and I saw pain in his eyes. I think I've been an idiot. A blind, selfish idiot. Glenn. No, Mum. Let me talk. I need to say this. He took a deep breath. After you left the wedding, Amy's parents started asking me questions. Questions about you, about our relationship, about the things Amy had told them. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture he had made since he was a child when he was nervous. Amy had told me that you didn't approve of our relationship, that you had said she wasn't good enough for me, that you had been cruel to her when you spoke on the phone. Glenn, I never spoke to Amy on the phone before the wedding. I know. That's what's driving me crazy. Because when I specifically asked her what you had said, Amy got weird. She started crying and saying that I was attacking her, that I was choosing my family over her. I leaned forward. And what else did you discover? I checked my phone. The calls she claimed you had made to complain about her never happened. My call log shows that the last time we spoke before I called you about the wedding was 3 months ago. I felt a pang of pain as I remembered that call. Glenn had sounded distant. He had cut the conversation short, saying he had plans with Amy. Why hadn't you called me, Glenn? He closed his eyes. Because Amy told me you were mad at me, that you had said if I wanted to be with her, then I didn't need to talk to you so often. She said you had been very clear that you wanted me to focus on my new relationship. I never said that. I know. And what's worse, Mum, is that a part of me knew something didn't fit. But it was easier to believe Amy than to face the possibility that she was lying. Glenn got up and started pacing the room, clearly agitated. There's more. Amy convinced me to change jobs. She said my work as an auto technician was beneath my potential and that her contacts could get me something better. But the new job... He stopped, frowning. What about the new job? It's at her father's import company. And it's not really a job, Mum. It's more like being a glorified errand boy. I run errands, organize documents, smile in meetings where I don't understand what they're talking about. And do you like it? Glenn laughed bitterly. I hate it. I miss working with my hands. I miss solving real problems. But every time I mention it, Amy says I just need to give it time, that eventually I'll get used to the professional life. He sat down again, looking defeated. And there's more. Amy has been pressuring me to sell my house and move into a condo she chose. She says my house is too modest for the kind of life we want to build. But Mum, I love my house. I bought it with my own money. I fixed it up with my own hands. Have you told her? I tried. But Amy has a way of making any disagreement seem like I'm being stubborn or immature. She says things like, I thought you wanted to grow up with me, or I don't understand why you cling so much to the past. I recognized the pattern immediately. It was classic emotional manipulation, making Glenn feel guilty for having his own opinions. Glenn, can I ask you something? Are you happy? The question took him by surprise. He was silent for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. No, I'm not happy. I feel like I'm living someone else's life. As if the real Glenn disappeared and was replaced by this version that Amy wants. And what are you going to do about it? I don't know. Amy says I'm going through a phase, that it's normal to have doubts after marriage. But Mum, this doesn't feel like normal doubts. It feels like I've made the biggest mistake of my life. He covered his face with his hands. And the worst part of all is how I treated you at the wedding. God, Mum. I asked you to leave. I humiliated you in front of all those strangers. How can you even look at me? I walked over and placed my hand on his shoulder. Because you're my son, Glenn, and because I understand you were in an impossible position. It's not an excuse. No, it's not. But it also doesn't mean we can't get past it. Glenn looked up. There was hope in his eyes for the first time since he had arrived. Do you really believe that? Yes, but it's going to require you to make some tough decisions. Like what? Like deciding whether you're going to keep being the person Amy wants you to be, or if you're going to fight to get your own life back. Just then, Glenn's phone rang. He looked at the screen, and his face tensed. It's Amy. She's asking where I am. What are you going to tell her? Glenn looked at the phone. Then he looked at me. For a moment, I saw the boy he had been, but I also saw the man he could be again. I'm going to tell her the truth. That I'm talking to my mother. He answered the call and put it on speaker. Glenn, where are you? We were supposed to have dinner with my parents. I'm at my mum's house, Amy. There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. What are you doing there? I thought we agreed it was better to keep a distance until things calmed down. No, Amy. You decided that. I never agreed. Glenn, I don't like your tone. I think you should come home right now so we can talk about this properly. Glenn looked at me, and I saw the moment he made his decision. No, Amy. This time I'm going to finish my conversation with my mother. I'll come home when I'm ready. Glenn Michael Henderson, if you don't come home right now, there are going to be consequences. What kind of consequences, Amy? Another long pause. Then in a cold voice, the kind of consequences that could affect your job. Remember you work for my family's company? The silence that followed was deafening. Glenn looked at the phone as if it were a poisonous snake. Are you threatening me, Amy? I'm reminding you what your priorities are. Glenn closed his eyes, and when he opened them, there was a new determination in them. My priorities are perfectly clear, Amy, and you are no longer one of them. He hung up the phone and immediately turned it off. Well, he said with a sad smile, I guess that's the end of my marriage. Do you regret it? Glenn thought for a moment. Then he shook his head. No, I regret taking so long to realize what was happening. I regret hurting you, but I don't regret this. That night, Glenn stayed in his old room. The next day, he returned to his house to pick up his things and found that Amy had changed the locks. She had left his belongings in boxes in the garage, along with a note that read, I hope she was worth losing everything for. But Glenn hadn't lost everything. He had lost a job he hated, a house that never felt like home, and a wife who had never truly loved him. In return, he had regained something much more valuable. He had regained himself. And for the first time in years, that felt like a victory. 6 months after what Glenn now called the awakening, I was sitting in my garden enjoying my morning coffee when I heard the familiar sound of his pickup truck in the driveway. He had bought a truck again after the divorce, saying he had missed having a vehicle that he actually needed. Good morning, Mum, he said, kissing my cheek before sitting down in the chair next to me. He looked completely different from the broken man who had appeared on my doorstep that day 6 months ago. He had gained back the weight he had lost. His eyes had life again. And most importantly, he was genuinely smiling. How was your first week at the new job? I asked him. Glenn had taken 2 months after the divorce to decide what he wanted to do with his life. He had finally accepted a position as a supervisor at a classic car restoration shop. It didn't pay as much as the job at the Wellington Company, but Glenn came home every day covered in grease and completely satisfied. Amazing, he said, and I could hear the genuine happiness in his voice. Yesterday we finished restoring a '67 Mustang. The owner cried when he saw it. Those are the moments I live for. I'm glad to hear you're so happy. You know what's funny, Mum? Now I realize how much time I spent trying to be someone I wasn't. Amy was right about one thing. I did change during our relationship, but not for the better. Glenn had been going to therapy since the divorce, working to understand how he had allowed Amy to manipulate him so completely. The process had been painful, but necessary. Have you heard anything from her? I asked. Glenn shook his head. Her lawyer contacted mine last week. Apparently she's dating the son of another prominent family, a lawyer in New York. Apparently he has more potential than I do. How does that make you feel? Honestly, I feel sorry for him. I hope he realizes it sooner than it took me. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, enjoying the morning sun and the sound of the birds in my garden. Mum, Glenn said finally, there's something I want to tell you. What is it, honey? I want to apologize, not just for the wedding, although that was horrible. I want to apologize for the whole last year, for allowing Amy to pull me away from you, for not trusting my own judgment, for not trusting you. Glenn, no. Let me finish. Amy told me many lies, but the truth is, part of me wanted to believe them. Part of me wanted the easy life she offered, wanted to be a part of that world of money and status. He ran his hand through his hair. But that world comes with a price, and the price was turning into someone I didn't respect, someone who would ask his own mother to leave his wedding. You were in a difficult situation. It's no excuse. A real man protects the people he loves. He doesn't sacrifice them for convenience. I reached out and took his hand. Glenn, the fact that you can see that now, the fact that you had the courage to completely change your life, that tells me everything I need to know about the man you truly are. His eyes filled with tears. I love you, Mom, and I promise I will never again allow anyone to come between us. I love you too, honey. After Glenn left for work, I reflected on the last 6 months. They had been difficult, not just for Glenn, but for me too. I had to face the fact that I had raised a son who, under pressure, had chosen a stranger over his own mother. I had to deal with the public humiliation of that wedding, the pain of being rejected by my own son. But I had also learned important things about myself. I had learned that I could maintain my dignity even in the worst circumstances. I had learned that true love sometimes requires taking a step back and allowing the people you love to make their own mistakes. And I had learned that it was never too late for relationships to heal if both sides were willing to put in the work. Glenn's divorce had been finalized last week. Amy had tried to get a substantial alimony payment, but in the end, she had accepted a much smaller settlement when her lawyer explained that her behavior during the marriage would not favor her in court. Robert Wellington had called me personally to apologize for his daughter's behavior. He told me that he and Margaret had decided that Amy needed professional help, but that she had refused. Instead, she had decided to move to New York to start over. Some people never learn, Robert had told me. I hoped Amy would be different, but I think we've been too permissive for too long. Now, sitting in my garden, I felt a peace I hadn't felt in years. The experience had been painful, but it had also been clarifying. I had learned that my relationship with Glenn was stronger than I had thought, strong enough to survive even this. That afternoon, Glenn came back with a surprise. "Mum, there's someone I want you to meet," he said. and there was something in his voice that made me pay attention. A young woman got out of the truck. She was pretty, but in a natural, unpretentious way. She was wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, and she had paint stains on her hands. "Mum, this is Sarah." "Sarah, this is my mum, Lauren." Sarah approached with a genuine smile and extended her hand to me. Then she noticed the paint and laughed. "I'm sorry. I was working on an art project. I'm an art teacher at the local elementary school." I liked her immediately. There was something real about her, something without artifice. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Sarah." "You too. Glenn has told me a lot about you." During dinner, I learned that Sarah and Glenn had met in a carpentry class he had taken on his days off. She was there to learn how to make frames for her students' artwork. They had started as friends, bonded by their love for creating things with their hands. "Sarah is teaching me to carve wood," Glenn said with enthusiasm, "and I'm teaching her basic mechanics. She wants to be able to fix her own car." What impressed me most was how they interacted. They treated each other as equals. They supported each other. They laughed at the same things. Sarah wasn't trying to change Glenn or mold him into something different. She liked him exactly the way he was. "You know what attracted me to Glenn?" Sarah said to me as we were doing the dishes. "The first time I saw him, he was helping an older lady whose glasses had broken. He used a bit of wire from his toolkit to temporarily fix them. He didn't do it to impress anyone. He didn't even know I was watching. He just saw someone who needed help and acted." "That's my Glenn," I said, feeling my heart swell with pride. He told me about his first marriage, about what happened at the wedding. I told him any woman who couldn't see how wonderful he is didn't deserve to have him. That night, after Sarah left, Glenn and I sat on the porch. "She's special," I told him. "She is. And Mum, I want you to know that this time will be different. Sarah is part of my life. She's not trying to replace my life. It shows. I really like her. Good, because I plan to keep her around for a long time." I looked at my son. I really looked at him. The man sitting next to me was the man I had raised, not the distorted version Amy had tried to create. He was hard-working, gentle, thoughtful. He was someone who fixed a stranger's broken glasses just because it was the right thing to do. "Glenn," I said, "I am proud of the man you are, even after everything that happened. Especially after everything that happened. It was easy to be a good man when everything was fine. But you had the courage to admit when you were wrong, the courage to change your life completely, the courage to fight for what really matters. That's what makes a man truly good." 2 years later, I am sitting in the front row of a small outdoor ceremony, watching Glenn marry Sarah. This time, there's no drama, no manipulation. There are no tears of anything but joy. Sarah was wearing her grandmother's wedding dress, simple but beautiful. Glenn was wearing a suit that had belonged to my father, altered to fit him perfectly. The ceremony was officiated by the pastor of the church where Glenn had started attending again. When the pastor asked if anyone had any objection to the marriage, there was soft laughter instead of tension. This time, everyone present was there because they genuinely loved the couple. During his speech, Glenn looked directly at me and said, "I want to thank all the people who supported us, especially my mother, who taught me that true love isn't about changing people, but about loving them exactly as they are." When the ceremony ended and Glenn kissed his new wife, I couldn't help but think how different everything felt. This time, there was no doubt, no sense of loss. There was only pure joy for my son, who had finally found someone who loved him for who he really was. Later, during the reception, Sarah approached me. "Lauren, there's something I want to tell you." What is it, honey? Thank you for raising him right. I know there were difficult times, but in the end, the values you taught him were what saved him. As I hugged her, I knew it had been worth it. All the pain, all the humiliation, all the uncertainty, it had been worth it to get to this moment. Sometimes, things have to break completely before they can be properly repaired. And sometimes the people you love most have to get lost before they can truly find themselves. But when they do, when they finally find their way back home, to themselves and to the people who truly matter, the joy is even sweeter for everything that had to be overcome to get there. Glenn had found his way back, and I had found something I didn't know I had lost. The absolute certainty that true love, the real love between a mother and son, can survive anything.